but also the browning of America, as it may be. When you look at Texas specifically, which the D.O.J. just launched a lawsuit earlier this week, you have a state that estimated 95% of the population growth, 95% of the population growth was black and brown people in the state of Texas, not white people, even though they actually added white controlled districts, white majority districts in the state. So you see this very perversion of the so-called American experiment that is democracy happening right now. And at the same time, with the voter suppression, we have the maps coming on the heels of the multitude of voter suppression bills that have been passed and are still pending in state legislators across the country. And so we really do see this shrinking of the opportunity for people to access their power, their political power through the ballot box.
Brother Cliff, I have a clip here of Attorney General Merrick Garland and Associate Attorney General Vanita Gupta announcing the lawsuit that Noah was just talking about, suing Texas over their discriminatory redistricting. I want us to take a look at that and get your feedback.
The complaint we filed today alleges that Texas has violated Section 2 by creating redistricting plans that deny or abridge the rights of Latino and black voters to vote on account of their race, color, or membership in a language minority group.
The Attorney General has made clear that the Justice Department will not stand idly by in the face of unlawful attempts to restrict access to the ballot. Today's filing demonstrates that commitment to this charge. The Justice Department stands ready to protect the constitutionally guaranteed voting rights of Americans in Texas and indeed throughout the country. Texas's population grew by 4 million people from 2010 to 2020, and 95% of that growth came from minority populations. The newly enacted redistricting plans will not allow minority voters an equal opportunity to elect representatives of their choice. Instead, our investigation determined that Texas's redistricting plans will dilute the increased minority voting strength that should have developed from these significant demographic shifts. Texas will gain 2 new congressional seats because of its population growth. However, Texas has designed both of those new seats to have white voting majorities. This is the 3rd time in 3 decades where Texas has eliminated a Latino electoral opportunity in this same district, despite previous court determinations that this violates the law. And the State House plan eliminated Latino electoral opportunities by manipulating or eliminating districts where Latino communities previously had elected their preferred candidates. These redistricting plans will diminish the opportunities for Latino and black voters in Texas to elect their preferred representatives. And that is prohibited by federal law.
Brother Cliff, there was a lot there. Help the people understand.
Yeah, well, one way to help the people understand, unfortunately, is to put this in historical context, right? Some people might look at this and say, oh, this is an aberration, right? This is an isolated incident, but this is very much consistent with the history, not just the history of Texas, but the history of this country. It's very reminiscent, actually, to the 3/5 clause. I mean, think about the Constitution and the 3/5 clause. What that basically suggested, and of course, this is black folks being counted as 3/5 of a person for the purpose of census and apportionment, and the essence of that is, we want to take advantage of your numbers in order to increase our own political power, right? And that's literally what Texas has done. They are literally taking advantage of our you heard the numbers there, and Noah talks about the numbers there, the 4 million growth, the percentage is black and Latino, but we get no political power out of it. The very people that are trying to suppress us and suppress our votes and do critical race theory and all this other foolishness, they benefit from our bodies. And so it is very much a continuation of the original sin that we saw in this country embodied within the Constitution. So it's another reminder that, you know, when people say, y'all hear it all the time. People hear about this voter suppression and racial injustices, and they say this isn't us, this is un-American. Unfortunately, it's incredibly American. It's America was rooted in this type of gerrymandering and not counting our bodies completely and denying us our political power while others gain power off of our bodies.
Damn it, Cliff! You had to go and contextualize it for history, and now I'm even more upset because you're right. How Noah, these folks are masters of this. They've been doing this for a long time. Why does it seem like the Democratic Party never understands the score? Because these folks are going for the whole ball game. We're not talking about, you know, a disagreement on a policy. We're talking about the entirety of democracy here.
Well, it's not that they don't understand it. There is a couple of different things happening. We have a commitment to antiquated gentleman's rules, for the lack of a better term, right? You know, these friendly, we all believe in the same institutions, and we don't really see institutionalists on the Republican side any longer. Or if they are, they're sacrificing their commitment and desire to protect the institution of democracy, the institution of the Senate, et cetera, in lieu of this very abrasive manner of just holding power, because ultimately that's what this is about, right? Deeply entrenched power. And they see the writing on the walls in terms of the demographic shifts that have been happening across the country. We're seeing similar challenges happening in Ohio. Advocates here in Georgia have already stated as soon as the maps are signed in Georgia, there will be lawsuits there as well. You know, we'll probably be seeing similar issues in Arizona and other very key states as well. And so we have, you know, the very clear, precise issue that's happening now because of also some of the rulings that have happened coming down from the Supreme Court, which now has a very entrenched conservative majority as well. And so what we have happening before us, we have a Democratic Party that is currently in control and might not be in control after the next cycle, that has a trifecta, that has the ability to pass something like the Freedom to Vote Act, which most of these maps would not be permissible under the Freedom to Vote Act, right? And it's not about making sure that Democrats retain power and maintain their advantage, but making sure that people who are trying to exercise their right to vote, people who live in districts that it makes sense that you have common communities voting together, unlike what has happened with the 6th Congressional District, the way it has been severely redistricted down here in Georgia to boot out Lucy McBath. What we have happening is that we have this limitation that keeps people out of the ballot box, or at least out of being able to have accurate representation in Congress. And so there is this very clear indication that there is a desire from people across the board. You just had Senator Tom Cotton from Arkansas complaining about redistricting the maps in Illinois. And yes, there are maps all over the country that look very ugly, but it's not just that maps look ugly. They look like very weird ink block drawings or anything like that. Partisan redistricting, according to the Supreme Court, is perfectly permissible. It is this racial redistricting as described by Assistant Attorney General Vanita Gupta in Texas, in Georgia, and other places that is the issue that violates Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. And the Freedom to Vote Act, though, would make both types of redistricting impermissible and create fairer maps for everyone. This is also why you've had to push in places like Michigan for independent redistricting commissions that are not bound by partisan considerations and are trying to grapple with what do fair maps look like.
Yes. Brother Cliff, like I was going to go to a whole nother topic. I wanted to talk about Stacey Abrams, but Noah, it's like she's cutting to the core of it, because if now Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act is what's the problem, what's to stop them from doing away with Section 2 the way they did away with Section 5, which brought us to where we are now? None of this would have happened without Shelby versus Holder.
Right. Yeah, you got Shelby versus Holder, and then you got the more recent decision just last year, which further weakened the Voting Rights Act. You know, we often say, and my dear friend and sister Latasha, who y'all know well, always says, you know, that we actually, as we sit here talking right now, we actually have less voter protections today in 2021, almost 2022. We have less voter protections today than we had in 1965. when the Voting Rights Act was passed. All right.
Wow.
Because it's been so gutted, it's been so weakened that, we don't have the pre-clearance and the other protections in there, all the enforcement teeth. We simply don't have it. And what Anoa just shared is so important, right? This notion of partisan gerrymandering versus, racial gerrymandering, and, the ways that and this is consistent with other aspects of racial racism and racial injustices that we see, where you see people try to argue it away, and sometimes the court accepting it by saying, "Oh no, this isn't about race. It's about something that's completely neutral. This is just about partisan. It's about parties, right?" And people forget that literally the voter suppression that we faced under Jim Crow was exactly that, right? There wasn't anything that said only black folks have to count the jelly beans, right? There wasn't anything that said only black folks have to pay the poll tax, right? It's all these different mechanisms that they created in order to get around the fact that they were really targeting black folks, but they couldn't do it based on the 15th Amendment. They couldn't do it just by saying that it was all about race. And so Jim Crow, in regards to voting rights, has always been about circumventing race and finding some other rationale. This whole notion of just citing partisan gerrymandering and not racial gerrymandering very much is a part of that tradition. We can't be hoodwinked by that.